Hi, everyone. It is Alexa at Teaneck Creek. Welcome to our restoration review. Just want to see if we are live. If you can see us, let us know. Like this post if you're here. Share with us. We are live. We are good. Hi, everyone. If you're new here, I'm Alexa, the Executive Director of Teaneck Creek Conservancy, and we have with us Allie Felema, who is our Conservancy Associate. And I want to introduce you to Adam Strobel, our Board President and the Director of the Division of Open Space for Bergen County Parks Department. To begin our restoration review, he's going to introduce our expert panel. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Alexa, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for spending your time here. Hope you didn't spend too much time outside shoveling. I know I did, and I'm a little tired at the moment, but I want to thank you for spending some of your time this evening, learn about a Bergen County Department of Parks project in Overpeck, one of our great park facilities in Bergen County. The concept of a restoration project, which we're doing, has generated from a number of years ago from a vision of an individual that many of us know, and that's the Conservancy's founder, Perry Rosenstein. He provided an idea and talked to the county back in 2000, 2001 with the notion of creating a park in a section of Overpeck that was not open to the general public. But he also had a vision of the park and tried to provide a place for people to come and recreate, to be able to be close to natural environments, and also to provide ways for the county to improve upon the environment that's in our backyard. And that's what really started our restoration work so many years ago. With his leadership, introducing to Rutgers University to develop a conceptual plan of what is now today a restoration plan that has been developed by one of our partners, Biohabitats. We're very blessed to have so many people part of this project. It is by no means a singular organization, but an amalgam of organizations and individuals who have led the charge to say, we would like to take back our piece of property. The organizational structure with us is a testament of people who saw a vision that Perry set out so many years ago, and for us to create something that is very new and unique for Bergen County. So this is our first ecological restoration project. We're very happy to get to this point in time. Again, this is a project of the Bergen County through the leadership of our Parks Department, through our county executive and board of commissioners. We have been blessed with having partners such as our designers, Biohabitats, as well as CME Associates. Biohabitats will have two representatives talking this evening about the project itself. One is Ted Brown, and the other one is Kevin Doms. We also have a construction manager that is part of the project. It is vitally important that we keep our efforts moving forward, and SiteWorks provides that guidance to us. We have Annette Wilkes, as well as Garrett Ray, who you'll be hearing a little bit in a couple of minutes. We also have a great contractor who's actually doing the work. That is Sumco Echo Contracting. A part of our projects, again, partners, is very important. The State Green Acres program has provided grant funding to the county to help launch the project and help construct the project for us. Actually, the Stormwater Canyon, which we'll talk about, was an individual grant with an amalgam of about $1 million of grant funding that was provided from Green Acres. So we're very, very pleased and welcome the partnership as always. Again, Rutgers University, through the Office of Q's, provided great leadership with that. Obviously, the Teaneck Creek Conservancy itself, who has been a standard bearer, and also the Puffin Foundation. Our restoration project, again, as I indicated, is a part of so many people, but it's also to bring about a little piece of our environments, and for people to recognize human decisions that have been made and human decisions that can be looked at again in a different lens so many years later. So our restoration project tonight, we're going to talk about the vision that was established by Perry, but also have the designers of the project through Biohabitats to walk us through what that vision is and what do we anticipate having at the end of our process. So it's very exciting for us to move forward with this project. It's taking a considerable amount of time to get to this point, but we are very pleased to have partnership and so many volunteers who have supported the organization and the vision as well. Obviously, our local volunteers directly with the park are vitally important. Our Weed Warrior program is vitally important, that has been maintaining the park property since 2001, 2002. We've also partnered with the Bergen County Audubon Society, who provides opportunities for people to come and learn about the environment, learn about birds in the area, and to be able to appreciate what they have in their backyard. So at the end of the day, we are making so many connections with people that they can see a benefit of the park that we have. So with that, I'd like to call upon Ted Brown to make walk us through our presentation. Again, our presentation is an offshoot of the successful program that was done at the Conservancy, the Conversations from the Cottonwoods. Alexa and Allie have done an excellent job to kind of bring to everybody insights about the organization, about different projects that we're doing. In that same vein, we're trying to take the same opportunity to reach out to so many people who have an interest in the park, in the Conservancy, and what is happening. So we look to have this be one of many types of opportunities for us to communicate to people. This obviously is the first one to talk about the vision, talk about what we ultimately want to see at the park at the conclusion of our project. So with that, I'd like to call upon Ted, please.
Thanks, Adam, and good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you this evening. And my name is Ted Brown. I'm a water resources engineer for Biohabitats. My colleague, Kevin Doms, is also going to make some remarks this evening as well. Biohabitats is an ecological restoration firm, and we've been doing this kind of work in these types of projects for over 30 years. This project's a little bit unique, though, because of its scale in part, and because of all of the different partnerships that are involved in the investment of the community and interest of the community in the project. So we've always been impressed by that, and impressed by the county's vision and the partners' vision for what we hope and expect to turn out to be an outstanding restoration project. And many of you on the presentation tonight have probably been tracking the trajectory of the project and the history of the parcel of land much longer than we've been involved. And a lot of that institutional or park-based knowledge has been really valuable to us along the way. And as Adam indicated, it started almost 20 years ago with the Conservancy establishment, and then some initiatives that went along the way with the outdoor education, a concept that involved Rutgers collaboration. We know that there's a legacy landfill, and the remediation of that is part of this overall restoration, and that planning work and design work started back 10 or so years ago. And then in about 2014, we really started to reinitiate the design for the restoration pieces. And so we've completed that design, and obviously today you'll see construction underway on the site. So it's a long history, but also a positive trajectory to be excited about, we believe. And obviously the site, it was somewhat of a gem in the rough. Those that were intimate with the site know that it had the bones and the structure for a fantastic ecosystem, but it was suffering from some bad management of the parcel, as well as some bad conditions that involve stormwater runoff. So we had debris piles and trash that needed to be addressed. We have water quality issues that needed to be addressed. We had erosion from the uncontrolled stormwater that needed to be addressed. And we had some challenging invasive species like Phragmites that need to be addressed. And with the plan and with the history of thinking about how to address that, we believe we've come up with an approach that will address these range of conditions. And the overall project had a number of goals. They were ecologically based, but also community based, because when the community interfaces and integrates with site ecology and becomes stewards of the landscape, like the history here at Teaneck, then that's when we see the most successful project outcomes. So we wanted, and when I say we, I mean our collective team, the county, all the partners. We want to enhance the site's natural resources, increase the biodiversity, manage the stormwater flows across the site, and treat that water as it's transferred across the site, filter it, infiltrate it, beneficially use it. Of course, we want to enhance and improve upon the public access. That's a major selling point of the site. And that's something that we're going to enhance and capitalize on so that we encourage more people in the community to visit the site. And with that comes health and well-being. And that's really particularly important in our era of COVID, where we need to be thinking about mental health and exercise and contemplative spaces and being able to release pent-up energies and perhaps even frustrations. And then finally, the education that goes along with that. And of course, the Conservancy and other partners like the Audubon group are really important to the overall education that is going to continue to occur at the site. And so we'll talk tonight about a restoration vocabulary, and I think we'll look to build maybe a glossary of terms. And you might hear some funny terminology tonight that's unfamiliar to yourself. And I think it's our hope that as you continue to visit the site and read signage and literature or listen back on presentations, that you'll get more comfortable with that terminology. And then when you're on site and you hear the term regenerative stormwater conveyance, you'll look at a particular feature and you'll say, I know what that is. I learned that at such and such a presentation. So the restoration that's going to occur is really quite spectacular. It's about a 43-acre overall site. We're going to be targeting 20 acres of that site for explicit habitat restoration that I'll talk about a little bit later on. That'll include about 430 feet of stormwater channel that'll be restored. Those are incised or eroded gullies that are actually dangerous and pollutant sources. We're going to heal those and regenerate those so that they can become headwater streams to the Teaneck Creek further downstream. We're going to improve about 300 linear feet of trail and with a little bit of realignment involved. And then of course, we're going to address the debris piles that are on site and move them to a single location at the southern portion of the site and cap that debris. I'm going to go through a couple of slides that are perhaps a little bit challenging to interpret or decipher. On the right-hand side is the overall site. And what we have is we've overlaid the restoration plan, the major features of the restoration plan on it. There'll be two consecutive slides. This slide really focuses on the left-hand portion, on the southern portion of the site. The next slide will be on the northern portion, and always on the right-hand side will be the overall site plan and restoration concept. There's a couple of major components overall to the work being conducted on site. The polygons, the squiggly, complete geometric shapes with X's in front of, inside of them are the debris piles. Those will all be addressed by excavating and capping those, and then again, bringing them down to a centralized southern portion of the site. Also on the west side of the project site is, and what Adam referred to as stormwater canyon. This is the runoff coming off of Teaneck Road and discharged in an uncontrolled manner where it's incised this gully. We're going to heal that, repair that with a practice called regenerative stormwater conveyance, which you can think of as a step pool type of system. And I'll talk a bit more specifically about that again in a moment. And when the water flows through that healed step pool system, it will then spread out. This is around the toe of the slope, off the hill slope here. And the water now, it'll be slowed down and it'll spread out across a wetland zone and also be directed towards the north into some other restoration features. Here's the northern part of the site. Again, the overall site plan. This really includes a really important and special restoration feature of the overall site. So spatially, it's probably the largest area of the restoration. And these are what we call sand seepage wetlands. And again, we'll show you some photographs of some precedent imagery of representative sand seepage wetlands. This whole wetland complex is where there was a lot of phragmites and a clay cap that was originally on the site. We are going to be diverting flow from the north tributaries, as well as flow coming off of Puffin Way or Oak Dean Avenue into this sand seepage system. So these are uncontrolled stormwater flows and storm flows peeling off of the stream, the north tributary. We're going to be holding that water on the landscape in these wetland cell features, and then slowly pushing that water towards the east and south as it gradually meanders its way through this system. That water will be filtered, cleaned, converted to groundwater, beneficially used, and taking some of the flood flow pressure off of Teaneck Creek over to the east. The other features in the northern part of the site is, again, a regenerative stormwater conveyance coming off of Puffin Way into the sand seepage cells, and a step pool restoration element on the north tributary. And so those are all the major components of the proposed and ongoing construction of the restoration features that you see out there today. A little bit more detail on a couple of those major features. The regenerative stormwater conveyance, as I mentioned, can be thought of as a step pool type sequence. So you're coming off of typically fairly steep slopes. So we have to manage the energy that water has, which can do amazing things in terms of erosion that many of you maybe have seen on site. So we want to build these very stable structures that hold the water and then discharge it in a managed way. And we step that water into pools and across weirs and down into another pool and across a weir and down into another pool. So this is a photograph of an actual system that we've designed and constructed in Maryland before. Over to the right is just a rendering of what you might imagine. We're peeling water off the storm drain system. The eroded gully is backfilled with sand and wood chips, and we're putting the water back on the surface, again, through a series of weirs and pools that cascade down the hill slope. In terms of the engineering, and this may be more detailed than some of you are familiar, engineering drawings for some folks are not something that you see that often, and so they can be complicated or appear to be complicated. Don't let engineers fool you. We're not that smart. So this is kind of the grading that goes along with that system. And you can see these circular features are the pools. The rectangular element is that riffle weir structure that I was talking about that controls the flow, drops it down into the next pool. And you just step your way down the hill slope until you can reach a more stable outflow condition that the receiving slope is flatter. In a longitudinal profile, this is what it looks like. So the vertical scale here is somewhat exaggerated, but again, we're stepping down these riffle sequences into these pool zones as it makes its way down the gradient. So hopefully that makes sense, and we can answer questions that you might have. The sand seepage berm is a berm that's constructed out of sand, a mixture of sand and wood chips. And the wood chips are an organic carbon source that helps with the microbial communities in the berm that both support the vegetative communities that are planted on the berm, and they also process some of the nutrients and bacteria that are going to be filtering through. So the berm holds water on the up gradient, the upslope side of it, and that's kind of a pool wetland area. That flow then seeps through very slowly, seeps through that sand berm and pops out the other end, all the while supporting the vegetative communities on the berm and then popping out into the next pool as we drop down in elevation, or it goes into groundwater replenishment. So some combination of those things. When we get storm events, there are weirs in the berms that will pass larger flows across the weir from one pool down into the next pool. And again, the whole idea is to hold that water on the landscape for longer periods of time so it can be beneficially used instead of a flashy system that goes to Teaneck Creek almost immediately after a rainstorm and then potentially causes some nuisance downstream flooding conditions. Kevin, you want to pick up?
Yeah. Thanks, Ted. I think that gives a really good overview of the fundamentals of the design and the various components that we're installing on the site. And so construction started in the beginning of the fall of 2020. And so I think it's worthwhile to go through some of the activities that have occurred on the site, show some representative photos, and sort of the sequencing that Sumco, the contractor, has been going through. So the first step was site clearing. Contractor had to clear the site for their construction access. They had to get out to sort of those interior parts of the park where they were doing a lot of the regrading work that's associated with the sand seepage wetlands, which Ted just discussed. And so this involved clearing all of the Phragmites, all that invasive Phragmites that was in the interior of the site. There were certain areas where some trees did have to come out. So in some of those sand seepage areas, the regrading is like lowering the area by close to 3 feet. So there were some trees in those areas that had to come out, but largely it was Phragmites and other invasive species. Go to the next slide, Ted. And so once they had the site cleared, they started working on regrading. So this is all the earthwork associated with those wetlands. They started in the southeastern portion of the site, so what we're calling the lower sand seepage area. And this is removing the surface material, removing some of the root mat of the Phragmites, as well as some of that clay cap that was in some of the area where the landfill was proposed. And again, getting the soil down, or the earth down to the subgrade, the proper elevation, so that we're going to get that appropriate wetland hydrology. So you're going to be able to get that ponding, you're going to have those pools, and creating that wetland habitat that we're looking for. So these are all photos of the contractor basically getting down to that subgrade before we install the sand wood chip mix, which is where the plants will grow. So if you go to the next slide, Ted. These are photos of that lower sand seepage area in the southeastern portion of the site. So this is after they've taken off the existing surface, brought it down to subgrade, and installed 1 foot of sand wood chip mix to the proposed elevation. So this is creating those sand seepage berms that Ted sort of showed the diagram of. You can see in the top left corner, that's one of the weir structures that Ted had mentioned. So that's like a stone, basically a stone weir that's going to hold the water. And so during storm flows, the water will flow over that. And you can see it's being ponded here in the pool. And the design is such that there are these hummocks in the middle of the pool, so that create some microtopography, as well as some wood material. So in that photo, you can see a root wad there. So it's kind of like upturned roots of a tree. It's a natural feature. And those are all to promote, these microtopographies and these microhabitats within the wetland pools. And there's tens of these pools throughout the site. And so they'll all have these sort of minor features to them. And then the photo down in the bottom right is sort of the outflow of the system. So that's the in the southeasternmost portion of the sand seepage wetlands. That's sort of the last weir structure that the water will go out of before it kind of flows down the slope and into Teaneck Creek there. So this is, what it looks like right now. It'll be planted, so moving on to the northern part of the site, the other component that they have essentially wrapped up at this point, the contractor, is the trail realignment. And so this is the portion of the trail that kind of runs parallel to Sandra Place. It connects into the retirement community, I think, over to the east. There's like a bridge that comes across the stream. And so the photo to the left shows that the trail used to run to the left over here, to the left of the existing trail in that low area, and it used to get flooded out. There was a long boardwalk there, but it was constantly flooded. So this trail realignment, we built up a berm and then laid out some stone dust there. So it's a really nice new trail that kind of connects through, so it won't be flooded, and provide easier access through this area, connecting the north of the site to the south. Go to the next one. So the other component that they have, made great progress on and are almost complete with is the DeGraw Avenue berms. I think Ted mentioned this in sort of the overall site plan. This is in the southern portion of the site, right just near DeGraw Avenue. And so after they've excavated all those debris piles, all that material that was in the debris piles, they're stockpiling in this area, as well as some other material on the site and building it up. And that will all be capped and then landscaped and planted with vegetation. There will also be a trail feature that leads up this berm. So you can kind of see it in the top right there. It's going to be a trail that kind of comes up this berm, and it'll be a nice lookout. And also this berm will provide some protection, from noise and disturbance associated with DeGraw Avenue. So the park will be a little bit more protected from that, those nuisances of the traffic. Next one. And so most recently, the contractors started working on the step pool systems that Ted had mentioned. And so, like he said, there are 3 of these on the site. These photos are are of the northern tributary, so the small stream that feeds into Teaneck Creek, just on the north of the site. And it's this step pool riffle system, so you can see the stone in there, you can see the pools, and then we also install some wood debris in there to, again, slow the water and create a little bit more habitat in these systems. And so this is actually complete at this point. The photo on the left there is essentially the completed structure, and then this will all be planted around it once they go into planting. Go to the next one, Ted. And so right now, Sumco is working on the regenerative stormwater conveyance system on Hillside Avenue, so at Stormwater Canyon. Which is really exciting to see this progressing, since this was one of the main, the impetus for this project. These photos show them excavating out some of the debris that was within Stormwater Canyon, excavating down to subgrade, so they can then place the appropriate thickness of stone, boulders, and cobbles that would create the regenerative stormwater conveyance. So again, the photo on the left is looking up towards Hillside Avenue, and then the photo on the bottom photo on the right is looking down towards where the bridge was. The bridge will be reinstalled and looking out into the park. If you go to the next slide, Ted. And so this is what the Hillside Avenue regenerative stormwater conveyance system looks like as of last week, I think. Yeah, the end of last week. So they have made some great progress. They've constructed the lower riffle. So this is, again, looking up towards Hillside Avenue. They've completed the lower riffle. And then 3 of the pool cascade systems. So you can see the large boulders there mixed with more of a cobble material that's forming the cascade. And so, during large storm events, this is going to sort of look like a waterfall or cascade system. Again, prevents the erosion that we were seeing in this gully. And then again, will all be planted around the outside. And so over time, vegetation will start to encroach on this structure, soften it up a little bit. And it'll look it's very natural, like the photo that Ted showed, of a project we did down in Maryland. And I think that's where they're at as of Friday before the snowstorm. And, they're going to continue working on this structure going all the way up to Hillside, and then they'll move over to the Puffin Way RSC would be the next, the next step in terms of their sequencing. And I think with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions. I think Alexa and Ali, you guys were going to sort of handle those, and I can feed them to us.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. This was so just eye-opening, and I think really gave everyone a really great understanding of what's going on with the restoration and a new overview of what's happening. We did get a bunch of questions in, so we are going to pose them to you. I think Ali is going to go up first with our first question.
Yes. So our first question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the habitat changes that are going to occur long-term as a result of the restoration?
I think we could probably
Sure.
pose that to Biohabitats.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Alexa. Yeah. So as we mentioned before, there was a ton of Phragmites. It's a monoculture of Phragmites largely in the middle of the park prior to this restoration effort. And the stormwater was coming in through these, eroded gullies, as well as these kind of channelized streams throughout the park. So there was no natural floodplain, which is what the natural system would be like here. And so that area of Phragmites is going to be converted to those sand seepage wetlands, which is going to be planted with native species. And so you'll have a more diverse wetland habitat, again, with all those microtopographies, berms, the hummocks, the root wads. Those habitat features didn't exist previously. It was really all Phragmites. And then in terms of the stream channels, they were, again, eroding gullies and eroding channels. And they weren't really able to get outside of their banks so much and create like a floodplain. And so the way that we're altering the hydrology on the site will create more of that natural floodplain. And so it'll be a conversion really from a monoculture of Phragmites to a diverse wetland habitat. It's probably the most direct way of framing it.
Great. So I think really kind of in the same vein of that, we had another question just come in. Is the stormwater naturally filtered through this design, or is there some type of filter media that is involved? Is there something going in actually filtering the water? Is this all natural?
It's all natural. So, I mean, as natural as, putting in the soil and the stone that's there. So we're using just the soil, the stone, and the vegetation itself. And so like Ted described, the design is to slow the water as it moves through the site. You create more contact with vegetation. You allow the plants to take up nutrients. By slowing the water, you allow sediment to settle out. By preventing, the erosion that was previously occurring in this channel, you're preventing all of that sediment from ultimately potentially going into Teaneck Creek. And so it's really just the features that we discussed today. It's the stone, the soil, and the plants. So that's what's used to in the filter.
And I think, this is Ted Brown, I think just to add to that, the soil component that Kevin's talking about, and I mentioned in the sand seepage berms, there's a heavy sand component with wood chips. And so that matrix, that media matrix that is natural in a sense, is very much alive with the microorganisms. So there is that processing, as well as there's the biological activity in that filtering process. So we've seen in terms of the water quality performance of these systems, very good performance in terms of removal of nutrients, okay removal of bacteria, and very good sediment control, because if you think about it, we're stemming the flow of sediment from all the erosion that was occurring previously.
Great. Our next question, someone is concerned. The butterfly garden is not going to be affected by the restoration. It is outside of the zone of disturbance. So no one has to worry about that area or the native plant garden at Teaneck Creek. But I did have a question come in about, will there be any changes to the pond, Dragonfly Pond?
So there's not any changes directly to the pond. We are maybe, Ted, if you go back to the overall site plan that you had, you can. So we're not touching Dragonfly Pond, but we are. It is factoring into how we're adjusting the hydrology on the site. So there's going to be some flow path structures leading to and from, flow path structure meaning those weirs, to and from Dragonfly Pond. So the water going into Dragonfly Pond and leaving Dragonfly Pond will be incorporated into this system, but there's no work being done within the pond itself.
Great.
So our next question was directed towards Ted, and it said, what's the purpose of removing the clay from the area where the sand seepage wetlands are being installed?
So the clay, is, I mean, it is natural as well, although it might have been imported as part of the legacy landfill construction. But the clay is a very impermeable boundary, so it prevents water transmission both vertically and laterally. And so in terms of wanting to create a wetland system here, we wanted to try to get beneath that clay layer so that we could have a connection to the groundwater system. The clay also, the Phragmites were present on that clay cap as well. And so we were targeting the Phragmites, and we were going to need to remove a certain depth of clay to also be removing the Phragmites.
Yeah. So speaking of Phragmites, we had a bunch of questions actually come in about that. And I think maybe this should go to either Garrett or Annette. What is the difficulty of removing the Phragmites, you know, kind of being there day to day if you're seeing that firsthand? And also, why don't we want Phragmites, and what will we maybe be putting in place of that Phragmites?
Garrett, do you want to, since Garrett is there on a daily basis,
Sure.
so he's making sure that the contractor is doing everything that the design has. So he has a really intuitive view of how this is being constructed. So Garrett, do you want to take it?
Sure. So the significance of removing the Phragmites is it's just as an invasive plant, it's one of the most aggressive and hardy plants that we've ever encountered. And being able to ensure that we've removed a significant amount of its root mass as part of the project is critical for the project's success in being able to allow for the new native species to be planted, and to ensure that any possible resprouts of Phragmites can be handled in a mechanically efficient way. And that has basically manifested itself in making sure the contractor is handling any earthwork material that could possibly be infested with Phragmites roots in a ecologically responsible way.
Great.
If I can just add on to that, and Kevin mentioned this, but Phragmites are a particularly aggressive, invasive species, and when they take over an area, it becomes what we call a monoculture. And when you have a monoculture, you have low biodiversity. And so one of the major goals of most restoration approaches is to increase the biodiversity, the complexity on sites, because that complexity then allows the sites to be more resilient, so that if there were some sort of change or perturbation, that the site would be more resilient in the face of some sort of disease that would come through. Take for example elm trees, and you have Dutch elm disease that can wipe out a whole slew of street trees. Well, that's because there's not enough biodiversity in those street trees, and if you have an acute event like that, then you lose all of those features. And so the goal of the restoration is to provide biodiversity that provides more complexity, that allows the system to be more resilient.
Great.
Speaking actually of the native plantings, someone asked if the plantings will be primarily native, first of all, and if they could donate plants or trees to the restoration. And I think maybe I'll direct that to Garrett, actually.
Yes, the plants planted will be primarily native, and I would have to ask Adam, I guess, if we would allow any, volunteer donations. I'm sure that we could accommodate.
Absolutely. Obviously, volunteers are very important for us, but one of the cautionary items I've learned from the project team members is that the plants that are selected for the restoration work are very specific, and they need to have a sense of quality and sourcing, and knowing that they're going to be in the best shape and be able to plant it and be able to thrive. So obviously you have some folks who would like to kind of volunteer with plants that would like to donate. I think we could probably accommodate that at other locations outside of the restoration area. Obviously, we have not the entire site is part of the restoration project. Our northernmost portion of the park at Fike Lane is an area that can accommodate the new type of trees. And I know Alexa and Allie and a number of volunteers for the past number of months have been working very, very hard in doing a lot of plantings in that particular area. So obviously we can talk to Alexa and figure out how to accommodate your ideas. So it's a great question.
We definitely can do some plantings at Fike. In that area, we just did 200 new native tree species plants in that area. So that's exciting. Our next question kind of jumps back to Stormwater Canyon. The first kind of question in this realm is what is the source of the stormwater that is running into the site, and how much debris will actually be caught? We have a lot of issue with garbage running off the road and things like that in the new stormwater conveyance systems.
Yeah, so the source of that stormwater is, and Ted, you could fill in on this if you have a better idea, but it's the residential area, I guess just west of Teaneck Road there. So it's a fairly large drainage area, and it's all those storm sewer pipes that then come and discharge at this outfall. In terms of debris that's going to be collected there, there's going to be a concrete inlet structure. So kind of like a rectangular, pretty high, tall structure where the pipe is going to come into, and that would potentially collect any sort of like leaf debris like that before it maybe comes out. That said, there could be other flows that maybe contribute debris to the RSC, but there's going to be a concrete structure that the pipe goes into before it kind of bubbles up and overflows into the RSC.
Our next question is for Kevin. It says that in the site grading photos that were shown, the winter and fall 2021s, the site appears to be very wet. They were wondering if since the purpose of the restoration is to prevent flooding, why is there so much water pooling on site?
That's a good question. There's a couple of reasons there. I guess first off, these pools are designed to be wet, so they are designed to hold water and slow it down, like Ted said. So the water will pond in these pools, and then will slowly seep through the sand seepage berms and into that sand wood chip mix. So this is what they will look like for a large part of the time. They're designed to pool like that. Also, particularly in these photos, they are filled with water because the upper sand seepage area, so the sand seepage area to the northern part of the site, is not constructed yet. So there's all this runoff. They're particularly ponded here because there's all this runoff that's falling on that part of the site and basically being collected in these pools here. You're going to have a more distributed pool system at the end of the project, where you'll have sand seepage pools and berms on the northern part of the site as well. So a couple of factors here, but this is what they're designed to. This is how they're designed to function: is to hold water and then slowly release it. So in terms of flood prevention, it's preventing flooding elsewhere in the area. So along Teaneck Creek, all of this runoff that is coming here would have been more flashier, so it would have gotten to Teaneck Creek much more quickly, which would cause those water levels to go up and cause flooding elsewhere around the site. So the idea is to hold the water within Teaneck Park and prevent flooding elsewhere.
Before you go to the next question, Kevin, just as a follow-up, some of these photos obviously are a little bit stark, but obviously this is not the finished product. The finished product is going to have a different look to it. It's going to be a lot of plantings to it. Maybe if you want to talk about that element, what we see here is just the base and the beginnings of it. But at the end of the day, these areas are going to be transformed with the vegetation that is planted in these areas, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point, Adam. These are all obviously pre-planting. And so if you go to the other example of the sand seepage berm, you're going to have grasses, and I think even more so maybe than what these sort of more shrubby species are, there's going to be a huge diverse mix of herbaceous grasses and sedges that are going into the sand seepage wetlands. So, and the photo that we showed is unplanted, and it's going to be filled with grasses that are going to be coming up in that area. So it's going to be largely green, and then a lot of flowering species as well. That is, again, just the proposed surface grade of the sand wood chip. That's a good point, Adam. That is not the final look by any means. And as those grasses are going to grow pretty tall, so you probably wouldn't even necessarily see that ponding in some instances.
Yeah. Kind of jumping off of that, there was a question of how deep do we think these sand seepage berm areas will be? And additionally, what is the plan for long-term maintenance? Or what maintenance will need to go into this type of habitat?
So they're actually not, so if you go to the slide of the sort of final grading of those berms, they are not very deep at all. They're going to be 6 inches to a foot deep at the most in a lot of their areas. And so they're really shallow ponding there, and they're large, so they're just over a large area, so they're able to hold that much water based on an aerial basis. And then the long-term maintenance. They're natural systems, and so they're really designed to be low maintenance. I think the biggest maintenance is going to be invasive species control. So to again just make sure that those native species are thriving. And that we get them well established so that they can be dominant and take up all the nutrients and take up the sunlight. I think that's probably going to be the biggest maintenance, but they're designed to be low maintenance and again mimic natural systems that don't really require routine maintenance like hard infrastructure. Ted, I don't know if you have anything else to add based on the ones that we've installed elsewhere.
I think the only other addition I would add is the stormwater infrastructure coming into the site. There are some hard infrastructure elements like a catch basin at the street interface that from time to time may require some maintenance and inspection.
Great.
This actually,
Go ahead, Allie.
I was going to say this segues very well into the next question. Someone asked, will this provide benefits to the city as well, such as preventing flooding by containing stormwater?
Yes, I say yes without tentatively saying yes to that. I mean, it should. We did not do any, and Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't do any modeling to say where reduced flooding might happen because of this project, but by managing and holding the runoff from the creek and from these two outfalls and preventing or slowing it down before it reaches Teaneck Creek, there will be benefits downstream in Teaneck Creek associated with that.
Our next question is actually for Annette. The habitat is obviously going to have more grasses and plants later on as we change over and plant new plants, and animals will be coming back. And so could you tell us maybe a little bit about how the animals are reacting to this project? And then also, if you have any ideas how we will keep animals from potentially eating all of the new plants.
Very good questions, all of them. What's interesting is that we're still seeing quite a few tracks from deer and there seems to be potentially a wolf by the size of the paw print that we find out there. So I think wildlife is still there, as well as we've been seeing some of the birds also are still around. I think that what's interesting is that there'll be a method so that the contractor has to maintain the site for a year, maintain it, making sure that all the plant material survives. So there is a good point about making sure that we've got keeping the birds away from eating any of the seed that's out there. And I think I might ask Kevin, I don't believe that we have any Mylar out there, but if we need to do that, that's something really simple to do that will just keep, you know, the birds away. I think part of it is because it's such a large site that it's just going to be finding out exactly where any kind of plant or any kind of birds start eating the plants. I think the food source is still pretty abundant out there.
That's right, Annette. And we do have, there's fencing for deer protection for the shrubs and the trees. Yep.
But rest assured, we're still seeing animals out there. It's good.
Great. I think our next question is going to Adam, actually. We have a question about paved walkways and also the connection between Teaneck Creek and the other Overpeck parks, specifically about connections of paths and trails.
Well, obviously this portion of Overpeck is naturally based, so we don't have paved trails through the park here. We don't have them currently. Obviously, what we have is two types of surfaces, either stone dust trails or wood chips, and that would be the same type of feel as we'll have at the end of the project. Obviously, Teaneck Creek Park, Area 1, as it's also known, you know, is just one part of the greater Overpeck. Obviously, in the new Overpeck, it's a different feel and a different experience. But one of the long-term goals of the Parks Department is to look at how all these sections could possibly connect. And knowing that we have a number of barriers, not only from a creek, but also highways, and trying to figure out how to connect both sides of the Overpeck Lake, and trying to connect these areas. So the department is always looking forward to finding ways and trying to implement opportunities for people to connect to other areas, which will have different type of surfaces and different experiences. But we've also talked about, you know, harder surfaces at the creek. You know, maybe something that is an idea that we've been looking at is how do we provide, you know, maybe a vantage point for people to look at Stormwater Canyon off of the Puffin Foundation parking lot. That may be an ideal situation that we could look at.
So our next question is for Kevin. It is that you had mentioned earlier that microhabitats will be forming in the pools of water on site. What exactly is a microhabitat?
Sure. So I think the photo on the top left is maybe representative of that. So that that's a root wad there. It's like so the darker image there is the darker feature in the pool is a root wad. There's some larger ones throughout the site, and then there's you can see this. There's in the lower left-hand corner. There's sort of like a branch, like a downed tree that that's been installed in the pool there, and so those provide shade. They provide shelter for different animals, and so microhabitats are sort of the small areas within this larger 20-acre restoration, this 45-acre site that kind of have unique features. So there's there's going to be shading underneath that tree. Some debris might collect there, and it provides a unique habitat for smaller animals where they might nest or they might hide from predators, things like that. So a microhabitat is something that created by it's developed by creating sort of these small changes in the topography or in the sort of features that are along the landscape. Ted, I don't know if you have anything else to more specifically add to that, but just, yeah, small changes on the landscape that kind of create, unique features.
Yeah, no, I didn't have anything to add. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. We have only about 4 minutes left, and we've gotten a bunch of questions answered. But the final question that has just come in is, I think might be what's on everyone's mind. What is the schedule and timeline for the project? And that, I guess, can go maybe to Adam or maybe SiteWorks.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Or do you want to take it, Adam?
No, I was just going to say, obviously our project construction manager is working with the contractors and obviously Biohabitats and CME, make sure the project's moving forward. But I'll have you give you your thoughts of how we're progressing, and if I need to, I'll jump in.
Okay. No, I think Adam's kind of touched on it. It's the contractor is moving along very quickly. And as far as we're concerned, it's like everything should be as it was planned to be completed. So it's working really well, working along very well on the contract. I think the big thing right now in my mind is what's going to happen with the snow. I mean, that's probably going to delay them potentially this full week. Because they can't really do anything when it's this much snow out there. So there's just weather delays that may happen coming up.
Great. Okay, well, that was our final question. So that is all for tonight. And if anyone has any other questions, you can still ask them in the comments, and we will compile and answer any in follow-up programs that we may be doing. And hope you guys will continue to tune in to Teaneck Creek. We are still open at Fike Lane. If you are interested in any programs or events, stay tuned to our Facebook page. And we obviously thank Bergen County Department of Parks, SiteWorks, and Biohabitats for being with us tonight and explaining what's going on here and really being a part of this wonderful project. And we're really looking forward to seeing the wonderful results. So thank you all so much, and we hope you have a great night. Stay warm, enjoy the snow. Happy
Thanks,
snow day,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.